And welcome back. Today, let's go ahead and make our very first GIF. So just as a recap, we had previously made this one just to demonstrate. I'm going to head press play just to kind of give us a recap of the simple bouncing ball. Looks fantastic, right? And of course, if I look at these each frame by frame, you can see how the different effects kind of are played out through this animation. So let's go ahead and keep that in mind as we look at our very first one. Let's do that. File, New. And because this is our first time making something in a GIF format, let's just keep it simple and just go to a 64 by 64 and transparent. That looks good. Just something simple because, again, we want to start relatively simple here. And if you notice, we do have the timeline already present here. I can toggle that by going to Window and Timeline, and you can see it is hidden now. And for all intents and purposes, that's perfectly fine. We're going to go ahead and let that stay hidden here for a moment. I'm going to go to my brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to, let's say, 4 pixels. Hold down the Shift key, and let's go ahead and create a floor here. There we go. And let's make a ball here. And I'm going to go up to about 8 pixels. Sounds good. I'm going to do a different color than I did before, so I'm going to do blue. So we have a blue ball this time. And so let's go ahead and just paint a simple ball. That looks fantastic. Now, what should be our next step? Well, if we think about this, this ball is probably going to end up coming down at an angle before bouncing off the floor and coming back up. Now, that, of course, is going to drive the decision. We know we probably at some point want to hit the floor here, which means I'm probably going to have a couple animations that are going to be like this, which means the ball is coming down and then it's bouncing up and it's going to eventually return to here. So I would have at least a mirroring effect of things here, though I probably want it to, though, when this ball comes back up, is actually a little bit higher than where it is. So it looks like it's a continuously smooth animation. All right. So if we think about this, we have 8 frames of movement that we just tentatively planned for, which means I'm going to need to make 8 layers of movement here. So the easiest way to do this, I'm just going to right click and rename layer 1. I'm just going to call that 1, just so I know that is equivalent to my first frame of animation. And if we duplicate that layer, let's go ahead and call it 2. And you can see if I hide layer 1, here's layer 2, it's exactly the same as layer 1. And so let's go ahead and do that until we have 8 frames of animation. So 2 we duplicate to 3, 4, etc. Again, we want 8 frames of animation because that's going to give us a nice, good visual representation without having to do a ton of work here. And one more. There. We should now have 8 frames of motion. So this should be enough for us to kind of get started with. So let's go to frame 1. Here's where we start. I'm going to go switch to the Move tool now. And let's go to frame number 2. And I want to go ahead and click on this ball and drag it. Now, one thing you'll notice, if I drag this around, you'll see that it also drags that bottom layer. And I don't want that bottom layer to be dragged. So we want to make sure that we are on the proper frame, and we will have to select the object that we want to work with. So let's go ahead and switch to the Quick Select tool. Just go ahead and click on that ball. And now I can go ahead and move that, because that's now moved, and I can drag that ball to where I want it to go. So I'm going to have it say, oh, let's just say right here to start. Go to frame 3. And now if I try to move in frame 3, you'll notice it will jump to frame 8. And that's because we didn't select the one that we want. So Control D to deselect. Use our Quick Select tool again. Go ahead and click on that one. Now you notice we're still on frame 3, so we can go back to our Move tool. And we can go ahead and drag that in. So I'm going to go ahead and move that to about where I want it to be. That looks pretty good. Control D to deselect. Use our Quick Select tool again on frame 4. Now frame 4, I want that one to be the one that's going to be being deformed. So I'm going to go ahead and just for now, just set it kind of roughly where I want it to be. I'm going to push that down just a little bit there. And let's go to frame 5. Same thing, Control D. We'll use our Quick Select tool to go ahead and grab the ball. Use our Move tool to move that into place. And we want that to say, I want that actually accelerating just a little bit faster. And Control D. And you can see quickly how this process is coming together. So here's frame 5, frame 6. Let's just get 7 and 8. and 8. And I'm going to actually have 8 kind of be up here because I wanted to kind of be off screen a little bit, just enough so that it's kind of coming back onto screen just in time for this one here. All right, now that everything's kind of moved, I'm using Control D, and now if I click on the individual shapes, you'll see that it kind of moves them around, but you have to be careful because it might still try to move those canvases that's part of it. So if we look at, for example, frame 6 here, I'm just going to go ahead and deselect these and hide them. If we look at frame 6, you notice that my bottom accidentally got moved around. That's because when I was moving that around, you'll notice that, just like with frame 5 here, the floor disappeared. All right, all the rest of these you can kind of see in the thumbnail view that those are still there. So I'll have to make sure to check 5 and 6 in relative position to the other shapes here. Which if that happens, I just grab quick select and just move that again to where I want it to be versus where it currently is. It's not a hard thing to fix, but it does mean that we have to be a little more careful about where we are positioning our elements when we are trying to make this animation. And if I bring everything back together, you can see where everything's at. So the only thing is, this is the part now where I might want to say, is everything where I want it to be? And if it's not, I can go ahead and move these around. Now, before we go ahead and make our animation, we do want to address this one right here, because again, we want to deform this shape just a little bit here. So what I'm going to do with this one is, again, use the quick select tool just to make sure I have this ball selected. And let's go to V, because I'm actually going to slide that over just a little bit. There we go. And then while I have that selected, I'm going to go ahead and try to deform it. Now, to deform it, I can just use any of my transformation tools here to kind of play around with that to try and get the look that I want that to do. I can also use free transformation to go ahead and just say, I want to try and just maybe bring that down or bring it out, however I want to do that to kind of get the desired shape that I want. So I just made that a little bit wider here, and I might say, I'm actually going to just bring it down. And you can see how it tries to adjust based upon where I have that ball at. And if I hit Control D to deselect, and hit Enter, and Control D, you can see here's my ball, and you can see it added some fading here. That's okay for this effect, because again, this is going to be an animation, so it's going to be moving, so it's perfectly fine. Now, I might say that maybe I want that to be a little bit lower. Again, we can kind of play around with that really quickly and really easily to go ahead and get to what we ultimately want that to look like. And I think that looks pretty good. All right, it's time to go ahead and make our animation. So we'll go to Window, Timeline, and we can go ahead and create a animation. If you don't have it already here, you can click on the Create Frame Animation option right here, and it will, of course, go ahead and populate the timeline right here for you. And we want 8 frames of animation, so I'm just going to go ahead and click this until I have 8 frames of animation. Now I'm going to start first on frame number 1. And how I go ahead and render this is I'm just going to go ahead and hide everything but that first frame there. All right, looks good. And now we go to frame 2, and we're going to hide everything but frame 2. Frame 3, you can kind of guess the pattern here, hide everything but frame 3. And so on and so forth, until we have every frame set up in the manner that we want it to be. And then we can test this out. So this is frame 6, 7, and of course frame 8. All right, so now let's go ahead back to frame 1. If we press play, you can see we have our ball looping here, and this looks pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. So let's just go ahead and stop this. And again, if we run that through, you do see that this one ball, of course, is showing up here on the wrong side of where we want that to be. But of course, that could just be a layering issue. So we would have to make sure that that ball is behind that layer there. So not a big deal there. If we ever wanted to do that, if we just go ahead and, like, for example, just close this Windows timeline here, for example, go back to layer 4 for a second. If we click on layer 4, I'm just going to go ahead and unhide this one here. All right, on layer 4, you can see where this is present. We need to go ahead and just grab our quick select tool here. All right, there's our ball. You can see where it exists here within this layer. We want to paint instead the line over top of it. Now, if we want it to be on top of that, that's fine, but I'm going to go ahead and say, maybe I want that to be different. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring this down, reset this a little bit, and maybe just add a little bit of black here along the bottom here, just to show a little bit of deformation here in that ball. There, that looks pretty good. And now if I go back into my timeline, go back to stage 1, you notice, of course, 8 now, of course, shows ball 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck that because I want 8. So let's just double check, make sure everything looks good. There we go. And of course, we still have that deformation there, so that looks great. All right, let's go ahead and export this. So I'm just going to stop the animation, go to File, Export, and then we're going to hit Save for Web Legacy. And you'll notice, of course, we have our GIF format here now. Now, there's a whole bunch of different options that we can dive deeper in here, but the big thing we want to look for here is our looping options. You can see we have the option to loop once, which means to play the animation just a single time or forever. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on forever today. Go ahead and click Save to save my GIF. And of course, done, we'll simply close this window here. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to go ahead and save this as bouncing ball. And just like that, my GIF is created.